Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar with Matt Dillon from Nuvem Consulting. This is Ricky Wheeler speaking. I'm the CMO at Ebsta. We're very, very excited as usual to be bringing you this webinar. With the You Hack, We Hack series, we are always trying to bring you the best insights about Salesforce, and we bring you the top players around the Salesforce ecosystem who live and breathe Salesforce every single day and help thousands of companies to get more out of the Salesforce systems. And data governance is such a huge thing. Everyone's data is decaying every single day, and Matt is going to give us so many insights onto how to build strong data governance, how to implement different processes to ensure that your data doesn't cost your business money. So Matt, are you there with us?
Sure am, Ricky.
Oh, hi,
Thanks
Matt.
for having us.
Oh, no, it's brilliant to have you. And I've already had a look over your deck, and I'm really excited about some of the insights that you're going to be sharing with our audience today. Do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself, Matt, and talk a little bit about Nuvem Consulting?
Sure, sounds great. Yeah, we're excited again to present a concept of data governance and really the strength behind the data that you have as an asset in your organization. Personally, Nuvem, we started in the Salesforce ecosystem about 8 years ago, really working with customers to build a journey on the Salesforce platform. Really, we focus on lead to revenue, lead to cash, and really helping customers and empower their processes and people with the data that Salesforce provides. So we're a firm that works in the Midwest, but also has clients on the East and West Coast. So we're just excited to really see all the momentum that Salesforce has created and help customers realize the power of the data that they have around the customer using Salesforce. So thanks for...
Matt's quite vocal on Twitter. You'll see his Twitter handle down there at the bottom. I certainly follow Matt, so you might want to do that yourself. And if you enjoyed today's presentation, then do always give Matt Dillon as well as Ebsta a nice shout out on Twitter. So following that, Matt, it's really time to pass over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ricky. Again, we're excited about this agenda, and we do have a full packed presentation here, so we're going to try and go through this pretty quickly, but I definitely encourage anybody with questions to bring them up and put them in the panel, because we definitely want to know if we're touching on the things that are making sense to you, and if you have questions, don't be shy and please submit them. So what I talk to customers a lot about day in and day out is, data quality and really making sure that you're making good decisions with your data. Powerful systems, whether it's an ERP or CRM or whatever you're using as a tool, is only as good as the data that you put in it. And one of the biggest problems that we see is that people don't really understand the strength of that stewardship of their data and making sure that the data is really 100% accurate to make sure they're making good decisions. So what we talk to customers about is, how do you provide some strategy for your team, and how do you empower your center of excellence, which we'll talk a little bit about, and try and standardize the way that people integrate and use Salesforce and capture that data. So we'll talk a little bit about that through the agenda. Talk a little about how we go through a application management and release management process. So making sure that everybody knows that, hey, when you do an application rollout area in the business, what is the impact does that have on other departments and other data sets? And when we have these great releases that Salesforce is putting out, how do we manage those releases and make sure that we're using that effectively and making sure we're capturing the right data? And then the last point is really, the great thing about Salesforce is it has an open API, which is fantastic, but what's your strategy around your integration, and how does that data that's coming into Salesforce impact the quality of your data? So we'll talk a little bit about, once you get all this great data in, how do you manage that data through some data cleansing techniques. And then finally, we'll finish it up with a little Q&A at the end. Again, I can't stress this enough, but one of the things that we talked about customers, whether they've already implemented Salesforce or they're thinking about implementing Salesforce, but are they thinking about on a data, how that data, whether you're in a great tool like Ebsta, where you can update information from your email, or whether you're directly in Salesforce, are you doing the things that you can to try and make sure that data you're inputting into the system is accurate? So we really focus on day-to-day data stewardship with each of our users and making sure that the process is clear in their minds of how they're going to use that data, not only from a reporting and a dashboarding perspective, but also a daily maintenance perspective. One of the crazy stats that we see a lot, and it kind of blows your mind when you think about how much data is already out there, but many times what we see is that a lot of the data is incomplete, right? So if you look at the data that you have, whether, again, it's in Salesforce or another system, there's missing pieces sometimes that are pretty critical, especially when you go to run reports or you're doing dashboarding. You're trying to roll this up to make some good decisions about business, whether it's a marketing decision, a sales decision, a service decision, or an ERP decision if you're using Salesforce on an ERP level. So we really talk about making sure that the completeness of data is something that's always top of mind. We're also, as you aggregate data, what in your mind is a dead data set, right? What is maybe the deal, the leads, the opportunities, the contacts, if things are dead, that's okay, but are we identifying that so we know we're not looking at it as part of our data set? Or maybe we need to know, hey, we want to know when we have that data, and how are we basically addressing it moving forward? Some of it's useless, in collecting data oftentimes is you're not sure what you're going to always need on the backside when you run reports, but sometimes when you identify, hey, we're not really using this data, or we don't want to use this data, let's, adjust our strategy on how to address that. And then we always have that situation where, hey, we get the system up and running, we get great data sets in there, and it's a snapshot in time, but really the data hasn't been updated. We interact with somebody via email, we see that, hey, they've got a new phone number, they've got a different address. Are we updating that data, right? Do we use tools out there like data.com or some of the other technologies to make sure that, hey, we have the most accurate data set? So it's not always human interaction that you might need updates for, but there's automated tools out there that we'll talk about as well. And then duplicate data, right? This is prevalent, right? We go to trade shows, we go to different landing pages on our website, we engage with people over the phone, and we collect data, but are we searching for data first before we're entering it in the system? Or are we building validation rules inside the system to catch duplicates? So a strategy that really kind of talks about some of that is pretty critical, and those are some of the things we're going to talk about. And there's multiple data entry points that we talk about data. We have situations where, people are just manually entering data into the system, whether that's via email through these great powerful tools that you have, or you're doing it directly into the CRM, or, landing pages that you built out in Pardot or different technologies. So, there's a lot of data that's getting into the system through these mechanisms. And some of that data is, we often talk about, captured, but is it meaningful, right? And when you capture that data, you're basically trying to make sure that, hey, when I hand our marketing team a lead and it comes into a landing page and then it goes to the salesperson, am I giving them enough information to engage, or does that person that gets the data handed off to have to take a stewardship role in making sure that data is managed, right? So it's a staggering statistic, but 90% of the data is created in the last 12 months, right? And then every year, 10% of that data goes. So it's astronomical to think about the data points that are coming in, but it's pretty critical in making sure you manage it moving forward. We also talk about importing, which is, again, part of the power that Salesforce has, whether it's an imported record or an integration. That is growing rapidly. We talk more and more with customers about, existing technologies that they want to bring into Salesforce to make Salesforce that, 360-degree view of the customer. Oftentimes we have to talk with them then, well, when you bring that data in, which system is going to be the system of record, right? And when you're doing an import, does it need a one-time import, or are we doing a full bi-directional integration? How much data is going to be passed, what data is going to be inserted, what's going to be upserted, and updated. So, these are critical conversations that you need to have internally with your team to make sure that the data that you have inside Salesforce is meaningful and rich. So common data entry errors, and it may not seem like a big deal, but these things can throw wrenches into the way you report and the way you do your data analytics. Name spellings, you could have, different variations, Matt Dillon versus Matthew Dillon. You have different punctuations or different references on address lines. You don't validate your states for consistency, and so when you run your reports to roll that data up, it doesn't match. You've got multiple spellings of states, or you're not using the features inside Salesforce to do validation. You have lead source, and lead source for your sales team could be different things than for your marketing team, but you want them to be consistent and have people on the same page on what's a lead source and how do we use it. These are just some examples. There's lots of them, but we really want to make sure that everybody's in sync with understanding where these data entry errors occur, so we can manage to them and support them, moving forward. One of the common things we see is, public-facing forms and maybe Salesforce. You have Pardot, which is a great marketing automation tool. A lot of people build out their landing pages. They're excited. They get rolling with Pardot. They start to get leads. They start to engage. And then next thing you know, you're changing things inside Salesforce, but you're not adequately going back to where the process starts with just the marketing team. So, common data entry errors and understanding how those errors can occur can help you, manage it moving forward. So, and there's a cost, right? I mean, we always talk about ROI and things that are really powerful around Salesforce and the platform. There's a cost to having dirty data. And so, the negative impact that you have around dirty data, is, when you're looking at a customer and you're looking at their experience, if you don't have accurate data to make decisions about that, then you're really kind of misinforming key people inside the organization as to how we're really doing, right? Whether you're looking at your account management and building an account organically, or you're looking at from a case management standpoint, hey, how are things going with the customer and what is their true thoughts around us, or, the sales and the marketing experience. It's basically looking at misinformation in multiple ways that could dramatically affect your engagement with that customer. Marketing campaign performance, right? So if you're not managing campaigns effectively, if you're not updating campaigns, if your campaigns aren't tied to a Pardot page and you're not passing that lead source through, are you getting the rich data that you really want to make sure that the marketing efforts you're doing on a day-to-day basis are going to impact your bottom line? Or two, you're looking to make decisions on, hey, should we be doing these campaigns year to year because we want to only do those campaigns that are really giving us our returns. So making sure that dirty data doesn't slip into the marketing side is pretty critical to measuring your performance. And then sales intelligence, right? So sales teams, both account management teams and new new growth, are we breaking down new opportunities versus existing opportunities that we're building? Those are key things that people are looking at. And ultimately, it all's got to roll up to the executive level so they can make decisions about what we're going to be doing, both from a tactical and a strategic standpoint. So ultimately, it hits your bottom line, and that's the cost, right? So this will vary just like your ROI will for each customer, but these are areas where we've really seen, if you're looking at that cost of that dirty data, how you can get some of those returns back if you're able to empower your people to make decisions about getting your data into a clean state. Again, 88% companies reported that bad data had a direct impact on the bottom line. So people are measuring this. They're looking at it and saying, hey, we need to get this under control. And what that really means is, they're trying to quantify it into annual revenue loss, which is 12%. So that's an estimated average. Again, these are rough numbers from Gartner, but 600 million is in loss. This is money that can be recouped by making a strategic decision to make sure your data is as accurate as possible and to use that data effectively to increase things on the bottom line. This is an interesting statistic that we also seen is that, from Gartner, 89% of marketers who expect to be competing on a customer experience in 2016. So dirty data that starts in the marketing process or in your marketing automation tool, it proliferates throughout your org, right? So this is the start of the relay, it's the first leg, and then we hand it off to the sales, and then it gets passed down to the sales ops, and then it goes down to fulfillment, and then into customer service, and finally, maybe even into accounting or ERP. But if it starts the wrong way in the onset, it's pretty critical that we fix that. So making sure that you look at your marketing automation efforts, your marketing efforts to collect the right data early and often is critical to getting those returns. So what we talk a lot to our customers about, and again, this is just our model, but a lot of customers do it their own way or a little bit different to this, but it gives you a feel for how we look at a transformation for our customers and how they are basically forced to go through some of these hard conversations about, where does the lead generation come from? In this case, Pardot is, web pages are being developed, landing pages, our offers, our forms, all those things kind of start that process. And then we go into how do we collect more data from that person, right? It's very easy to get a first name, last name email, but that's not all the data we need related to that potential customer. So we need to, all the way along the line, start gathering more details, whether we do that through a phone call, whether we do that through another form, whether we do that through a mechanism of nurturing. We want to make sure that by the time we hand this off to our sales team, we have a pretty good picture of who this person is, what's their persona, all those details, right? And then from the sales side, they should really be then engaging and getting ready to transition this into a customer, right? And so what are the data points that they're responsible for and the things that they need to do? And then, okay, well, hey, if we're building a data set around products and price books and things that this person's going to purchase from us as a provider, whether it's a product or a service, what does that mean to our relationship and what data can be collected there, all the way through to order fulfillment and then to customer service and then finally into the ERP. So it just gives you a visualization of how important it is along the line to collect the right data to make sure that you're looking at good data when you're engaging with your customer. This is one really quick snapshot that I think is pretty telling. It's a subset of the overall picture, but Sales Cloud really is that central repository for all the customer and partner data, right? So we know that's the critical piece, but it has to be customized correctly and managed with care, because what we're trying to do is really gauge what does that customer experience look like. And so making sure you're collecting the right data sets on the marketing side to pass to the sales side is critical, but also making sure from a customer service perspective and from an ERP perspective, when you're passing data back into Salesforce, that we're making sure that that data that you're showing is meaningful around that customer. And it all starts with Sales Cloud. So, it is the central hub, if you will, of the area. So making sure when you design your Sales Cloud that you're making sure that each data sets are meaningful. And when I say meaningful, many times what we talk to customers about is reverse engineering their reports, right? Critical dashboards and reports that they're going to be using to look at both at a C-level all the way down. So that will give you some insights into the data points that should be collected at the account level, contact level, opportunity level, and lead level. So those are things that we pretty much tell people, hey, when you're looking at your implementation of Sales Cloud, these are critical things you're going to want to make sure you're capturing. So, what I've kind of told you is some of the things that we see, some trends supported by some things that Gartner shared and some other industry experts have shared. But okay, so where do you start, right? I mean, it's a lot of options. It's a lot of data that I've just thrown at you, but where do you start internally to be able to manage this? And we talk a lot to our customers about creating a center of excellence, right? And a center of excellence is a collective group of people that are responsible for bringing all of their processes, all of their people's feedback into a centralized group to have discussions about tactical and strategic things that you want to do within Salesforce, right? So it really helps establish kind of that standardization to say, as we grow, as we scale the business, how are we going to be able to make sure that, if we hire 10, 15, 20, 30 more people in a particular role, that they're going to be able to understand our process, they're going to understand what their responsibility is in collecting the data, and ultimately how that's going to roll up and affect other departments and other people. So it's pretty critical to making sure that you start talking about processes and people early, and you get them involved through that center of excellence. The other thing we talk a lot about is, Salesforce's ecosystem around the platform is robust. There's a lot of apps that are in the marketplace that will help you do things that go well beyond Sales Cloud, go well beyond Service Cloud. So part of that is just like you go through the process of vetting out your CRM, you also need to talk about those applications and what you're trying to accomplish with those applications, right? Whether it's a project management tool or you're doing supply chain or you're doing any number of different things, you need to have a conversation with that center of excellence to really understand, here's the platform, here's the data sets we're going to collect, here's the reports we're going to get, and, how are we going to roll that out and incorporate that into our center. So really critical there. The other powerful thing is Salesforce does some very rich and deep enhancements into the Salesforce platform on a 3 times a year basis, and the 50th is coming up, which is just a testament to their commitment to do this. But what I oftentimes don't see customers do is they get onto the platform, and then their team, their admin group, is inundated with things that happen on a day-to-day basis, but they can never strategically kind of pick their heads up and say, hey, you start to share your release notes, what's coming out with your center of excellence. You start having conversations about how can we do this? Is this important? Do we want to do this, right? And that's a conversation that really can have, and it's not just one person or 2 people, it's a group of people doing that under that center. So really highly encourage you to look at that. The other thing you have to have a conversation about is, as you start connecting Salesforce to other technologies, what is going to be the system of record? What does the schema look like? Are you talking about data fields in one system, whether it's ERP or any number of other systems you're connecting to, and are you incorporating that data strategy into there and talking about with different stakeholders what the impact of having that data in Salesforce would be. So those are things that we highly encourage you to do under that center of excellence, and make sure that you really can, have a conversation, have some strategy discussion, and then tactically go out and execute the vision. The center of excellences vary by each customer, but what we see is some core tenets that I wanted to share with you, right? So the executive sponsor is probably in many cases the most critical person to building the vision and building the strategy, right? Here's where we want to go. Here's where we're going to go between, the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months. And then, really building a team to make that happen, right? So you got to have sales and marketing. You got to have a system administrator. You might have multiple depending on the number of users you have. You need somebody that's the end user champion, right? Somebody that's the we like to say the poster child, but somebody that really embraces what you're trying to do and can really lead by example and show maybe some people that are a little bit more change adverse on how to get there, right? And so those become leaders and start having conversations with other departments about what the CRM system looks like and what are we trying to accomplish with our customer experience. You really do need to, though, even though it's a collective group, assign one person that's the owner. And the best analogy I can give you there is it's kind of like when you roll out an ERP system, you need a controller. You need somebody that kind of understands all the moving parts, and that person doesn't do it alone. They're involved in getting everybody involved in the process, but they really own it when the day is done and are accountable. So you can't have multiple people being owners. You have to have one, but then they surround themselves with these individuals that becomes the center of excellence. I've seen many center of excellences that kind of start initially meeting on a pretty regular basis. They might meet, in their initial Salesforce rollout every 2 weeks, every week, depending on the frequency is the intensity of their rollout. But then they start to meet once a month, and then just start to have conversations on a monthly basis as to what needs to happen. But it is continuous, right? Because Salesforce is a journey. And what we see is that your data set's going to change, your management of that data, your processes are going to change, and making sure that you meet on a regular basis is critical. I would also say, we've started to see people change it up, right? And maybe add some new blood, new people that come into the mix that can offer some thought leadership. So we really encourage you to look at this as a successful methodology to making sure you clean up your data. The other thing we talk a lot about is data standardization, right? Making sure that the data is complete. So, making required fields in different roles and making sure they're filled out. Don't import data without that validation of the required fields, because otherwise you're just creating a little bit of a mess. Make sure the data is accurate, right? And we know that errors occur, but when they do occur, let's make sure that everybody is trying to bring to everybody's attention, hey, we saw something that wasn't accurate, let's fix it. Meaningful and meaningful is pretty powerful, because we want to make sure when the day is done that we're not just entering data to enter data, right? We want to make sure that the data that we're entering is going to be something that somebody is going to be building a report on, that's going to be helpful in their job, and it's going to give them value to the system that they're implementing in Salesforce. So that's pretty critical to making sure that we standardize and know the dashboards and reports are going to mean something to users. So, and then well organized, right? I mean, that goes without saying, but sometimes when you have the ability to create so many fields and do different things in the Salesforce, we can sometimes show too much, and that can lead to ambiguity around what needs to be entered. And so when I say that, you really want to make sure for each user experience, you streamline it and only give them visibility to the things they need to make good decisions, but only ask them to fill out data that they have to. And then, probably one of the things we have seen customers struggle with is, a common language around Salesforce. Salesforce has the standard objects that everybody understands and knows. We've gotten into an era where people are building a lot of custom objects under Salesforce, and I would say that our guidance on this is really to talk a common language. Everybody should know what everything means inside Salesforce, and subsequently, make sure that they're aligned with what connectivity you have to other systems and Salesforce, making sure that everybody understands what does the Salesforce component do and what do these other technologies do. So just making sure that you build a library, if you will, of what that language is to make sure that there's no ambiguity around it. We talked about this a little earlier, but again, can't stress enough required fields, right? If you're going to report on something, it should be a required field. If it's something that somebody can't collect in the early phases, make sure they're collecting it and have a methodology to collect it downstream. Making sure that your pick list values are meaningful and everybody understands when to use those pick list values, and make sure they match, right? So common thing is, you add 3 new industries in your Salesforce org. Did you add those to your values in Pardot when you're creating a landing page, right? Or, vice versa. So it's one of those things that making sure that when we're doing those types of changes, are we making sure that we're syncing up and continuing to have conversations about making that data transparent throughout the process. Application governance, again, is one of the things that we see a lot of people oftentimes struggle with a little bit with Salesforce, not because Salesforce's platform doesn't do a good job. In fact, it has so many options for you, but it's really a conversation about making sure each department talks to the admin team and talks to the Center of Excellence. So really make sure they go through a proper discovery on the apps, making sure they see the full picture of, are we using objects, and is there a roadmap for this app that's going to be continuing to grow? Or is this just an app that's been out there and they haven't really done a lot of updating to it, and it's going to probably sunset at some point, right? So going through a discovery, making sure there's value in each of it, components, and understand what those touch points will do to your process, and talk about that from the Center of Excellence standpoint. What are the things that if you added this app, is it going to affect, right? Is it going to affect your integrations? Is it going to affect your marketing automation? Is it going to affect your service delivery team? So having a conversation with the Center of Excellence just to vet that out and make sure that there's no gotchas once you implement the app. And then build a process, right? So the process is going to change within the organization. It's going to grow. You're going to add new people. Continuing to look at that process and including your training is key to making sure that the governance is, one, fully vetted out, but also, two, that the implementation is successful. We talked about release management, huge changes going on at Salesforce now. I recommend you follow the same process that we discussed on the last, which was, really make sure that you have a vetting of that discovery. What are the changes coming? What are the things that Sales Cloud's doing, Service Cloud, all the different areas, Force.com if you're using Force.com. So making sure you're looking at that, making sure that what the impact is, and then, talking about it from your Center of Excellence. What are the things that could be changing? Are we going to be making these changes? And if so, what is the downstream effect to our processes? System integration is so critical in the sense of the power of Salesforce really enables you to open up that API and to pull data in. We want to make sure when we do that we have a view of the data schema inside Salesforce, and that you do all the testing and make sure that the data is approved by bringing that data in. And what I mean by that is that, pulling in data into Salesforce is powerful. You want to be able to store it, you want to make sure it's effective. Sometimes, you can use a strategy where, maybe you're using Connect Maybe you want that data read only, maybe using a tool like Jitterbit or Boomi or Cast Iron. And some of that is that it allows you to see that validation, to see the schema, to see how you're going to bring that data in, and then talk about how you're going to really use that data moving forward. One of the great examples, I have a customer that basically, wanted to bring in the billing data. So they wanted to pull data into Salesforce and they wanted to make that available on the account. And so that makes a ton of sense. And what they found in their first phase is they were pulling in summary data, and the power in that was that the account managers could then see the aggregate growth on those accounts. But then quickly they said, hey, you know what, why shouldn't we bring in the detail, right? The line item detail, because the next question is how did you get to that summary amount? Where did those invoices come from? So that's the type of discussion that needs to occur, and do the account managers have the authority, or should they see that, is another question that has to be vetted out through that center of excellence. But that's just one example of how conversations around system integration are pretty critical. And then connecting that architecture together and connecting all those apps, part of it is is the integration bidirectional, right? So if somebody makes a change in the ERP system, do we want to update Salesforce? Vice versa, if somebody makes a change in Salesforce, do we want to pass that into the system? So again, making sure that that's meaningful, making sure that those data points are updated and maintained is critical. And if you don't do that integration, then do you have a situation where some system's not being updated, and is that what you want? So those are conversations that have to occur around system integration and making sure that the data is both managed and maintained, moving forward. That's a pretty important thing for a lot of people. I would definitely encourage you that if you don't have somebody on your staff that's doing system integration today, or you're considering system integration, partners like us, and there's many out there also that do this type of integration work, can provide you guidance. So you're not alone. Don't feel like system integration is something you have to do by yourself.
This is, sorry to stop you there, Matt. We've got one question which is quite specific. Got Jess, who's having problems with the integration with the App Exchange. They're an App Exchange application, and the App Exchange is creating a lot of duplicates in their system. Is this something that we'd better take offline, or are you aware of that problem happening for anyone else? Have you got any sort of solution for that? So they've got an App Exchange listing, people are trying to do a free trial, and they're just getting hundreds of duplicates being created.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so in that so I would imagine through the App Exchange, they're passing that directly into their Salesforce org. Salesforce has a great version. I think it actually came out 2 versions ago, Ricky, that you can actually do dedupe, and you can actually catch and validate those dedupes based on certain criteria. That's what we use internally. We kind of drink our own champagne, as we all know, right? So we use that, and that helps us because we run into the same issue, right? Somebody goes to the App Exchange and says, hey, I want to talk to Nuvem Consulting. So the dedupe process that we have is sufficient enough for us to catch those things, and then we need to make decisions on do we want to merge those records together, right? And that's part of the data cleaning that we can talk about here on the next slide. But basically, you have to have a little bit of human intervention along the way to catch those items and then make some key decisions on that. But the standard Salesforce operating solution has that, but there are other tools, right? There's other dedupe tools that have been out there for a long time that can also catch it. So I would say definitely look at the standard dedupe that Salesforce has first of all, and then if you want some recommendations on a couple other providers, we can definitely give those to you.
Sure, thanks.
Sure. Yeah, great question. Anything else, Ricky? Any other questions out there you want to address now, or should I keep going?
There's been a few building up. Some guys have said, you spoke about required fields earlier, and they're saying, it's all very well making lots of fields required, but this, when people can't easily save down a record, it leads to people sort of getting maybe disenchanted or lower user adoption because there's too many controls put in place. Is there a formula, or where's the limit in terms of required and really sort of maintaining data versus making the system usable?
That's a great question, and we run into that scenario quite often, especially as you get into the marketing automation side, right? Because you pass in a lead very much, and then somebody has to fill out those required fields, and that can be a source of frustration if a bunch of the data is missing. And so, ultimately what I do in that case, and a lot of our consultants do, is sit down and say, well, when the day's done, let's look at the reporting, right? And look at what we're trying to accomplish to try and gain visibility in any particular area. And then try and show this is what we're trying to do for that particular team. So they can understand. Now, there may be a separate conversation that says, hey, is this really need to be a required field, right? Does it have to be? And that's, again, a center of excellence conversation of, are we going to really use this data, or is it just something that we think we might want to report on later on? Well, until you go through those conversations and start to break out the data into the reports and dashboards, that's kind of where you have to beat it up a little bit internally to see if it makes sense. But I 100% agree. You can make way too many required fields, and then everybody gets frustrated, and that's not what you want. You want to have a conversation with everybody about how we're going to use the data and make it meaningful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so some of the essential things that, again, we touched on with the essentials of cleaning up that data, right? Because we saw from the statistics that, we get the data in, it's incomplete, and then maybe there's pieces that have to be updated. So it is a cleaning of the house, if you will. And, for a lot of our customers, they look at, importing data and then, merging the data together, and then, okay, we have to look at those data sets that are missing. And there's a lot of app exchange tools that you can use to identify pieces of missing data. And then did you try and standardize it and normalize it, right? And make sure that it's following that process, because you're asking in the sales process somebody to share their information with you to get that lead in. But then you really got to massage it a little bit to make sure you're pulling in the right data. And so it is a process that you need to follow. You want to make sure you catch the dupes, right? Because we all know there's dupes. We've seen that. And then, we want to verify and validate that through the sales process. And then, again, it's a journey. Keep going through it and keep going through it. But everybody has to know what their role is in that data. And managing that data, and that's really what it is. And we always say it's spring cleaning for a lot of people. So you have these great automated tools like Ebsta, Ringlead, Data.com that are there, right? And we use Ebsta too. So it's one of those situations when some of our team is in their email and they're looking at, well, okay, is this data match up? I see there's a new phone, it doesn't match. It's a situation where when you're going through that process, you have to validate how those things can occur, right? And are you using the clean tool in data.com, which can go out and identify, okay, hey, how much of that data is clean? How much of it may or may not be accurate, and what's your threshold there, because you have to determine, what your threshold is. And those are things that are a journey for yourself, right? You can use a methodology on the front side of your process that says, hey, we're not going to import any duplicate. And I've had other customers that said, well, I really do want to potentially import that duplicate because maybe there are situations where the data, pieces of the data for that person's changed, and then I want to merge it, right? So you have to determine what your methodology is. Do you want to prevent data from getting in the system, which may or may not be what you want? Or two, you may need to collect that data, but then merge it together. And these tools will allow you some thought process behind how we're going to manage the data and how are we going to empower not only with the automation, but our human element, which is our individual processes and the people that touch them, and how they address those data issues. Data stewardship is, and if you can walk away with one thing, is everybody's responsibility, okay? So this is something that executives need to set the vision that we're using these reports, we're using this data to drive our business, and the importance of that data is critical into us making good decisions. Department leaders really need to make sure that they provide a number of tools to their admins and to the people that are basically using the system to enforce your strategy, right? Your methodology, whether, like you said, it's Ebsta or data.com or any number of tools. Those are things that you want to make sure you put in place to make their job easier. Admins have to train the sales reps on best practices around managing data, and they have to show leadership in if there's a new situation that arises, how are we going to address it, right? Is this something we can automate? Is this something we just have to manage manually? And if so, how do we coach our team to do that? And then, we have to show the reps what the impact is by managing that data. Give them visibility to some of the reports and the things that you're using and show them how critical that is to making good decisions about what you're going to do next. So data stewardship is everybody's responsibility. It's not one admin, it's not one sales rep, it's everybody. And we really believe that, we live that ourselves. So really encourage you to take a look at that. Just some closing remarks again to recap, bad data costs you more than you think. So do this now. It's a lot harder to do in 6, 12, 18, 24 months when you're well within your Salesforce database. You've got all these data points coming in and you're trying to figure out the mess. So do it now. Get everybody involved. Build a center of excellence to really help you with it. Talk to the people that are doing the integrations and making sure that your data that's coming through is in fact accurate. Make sure that you're getting the right data and that your team is optimized to really deal with the adoption. Are you catching things with the deduper or with the clean tool or Ebsta to address those things, right? And do people know how to address it? The center of excellence, if you haven't done it yet or you're waffling on whether to do it, it's a huge return, right? Getting a team of people behind Salesforce and the different technologies that you're integrating with Salesforce and having conversations about these things is huge. So not one person can do it alone. I've seen that time and time again where you got one person that's really passionate about data governance and doing it, but they really can't get anything done because other people aren't involved. So empower your teams, bring them into the conversation, start having those conversations sooner than later to make sure you're getting the data that you need and they need and your executives need out of the system. Part of that is, think about some of these new apps that are coming out in App Exchange, talk about them with that center of excellence and develop a release management and application plan, right? How are we going to manage these new applications? What's the impact on their processes? And then, take a look at the new releases coming out in Salesforce because there's some really neat things coming out, but you got to stay on top of it. It's proactive versus reactive for sure. So, and then I always recommend, look at your data and really try and clean up the quality. There's going to be stuff that goes through the cracks. No one org is 100%, accurate, but what you try and do is shoot for a goal. Shoot for a certain percentage. You want to be 92%. You want to be 95% accurate, and you can create even some standard reports in Salesforce that'll tell you, how accurate based on required fields or data points in your system. How accurate is that? But ultimately, you got to take a look at it. You got to clean the house, right? So think about that. Continue to commit to it, and those things will help you to get better data quality and to help you eliminate, the cost of your dirty data. Ricky, I'm not sure if you've got any other questions, but I really appreciate you guys giving me the time to talk about this. It's something we're passionate about, we're excited about. Ricky mentioned if you need my email or want to reach out on Twitter or just want to visit Nuvem and learn a little bit more about how we go about helping customers manage their data. I'd love to assist any way I can.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Matt, for your time today. We do really appreciate it. And to Stephanie, who isn't on the call but has been doing a lot of work behind the scenes. There have been questions coming in, so now is as good a time as any. So let's kick off with the storm that is duplicates. We've got questions ranging from, is there an out-of-the-box way to manage and merge incoming leads, right through to, is there a de facto tool for duplicates? Duplicates are a major problem. Is there just a de facto tool for managing them?
Yeah. What's the magic bullet?
Exactly.
If you will. Yeah. No, that's a great question. So how the evolution of deduplications occurred in Salesforce, has kind of been over a period of time. There's some very powerful tools. Ringlead's one of them. Cloud Dingo. There's a lot of tools out there, and they all do different things, right? So I just look at that application process as this is a great opportunity for a lot of customers to sit down and employ that center of excellence to have a discovery around deduplication, right? I'm always thinking about how to use that. The strategy is really, you have to look at the duplicates you're getting now and where they're coming from, right? So whether that's through an integration, whether that's through your marketing automation, through any combination. But that's really what I always get to is what's the source. And then each of those tools does deduplication, but a lot of them do it in a different way. So some of them validate on the front side before it ever gets into Salesforce and have a cleanse process so you don't muddy your Salesforce data. In other cases, they allow the records to get into Salesforce and then they match those and then can merge those. So definitely to answer the question about leads and merging those leads, definitely ways to do it. But each of those tools, kind of lays that out a little bit differently. So I always caution people before I have to say, we can't prescribe without doing a little bit of diagnostic, but the diagnostic you need to do is very much understand where those sources are coming from, understanding how they're getting into the system, and then two, look at the different apps and the app exchange that will solve it. Now, what I will tell you is that the new deduplication function inside Salesforce uses the methodology of really, once it gets into Salesforce, then you can kind of isolate it, validate it, and based on certain rules. And we use that, but that may or may not work for everybody's scenario. So I definitely would encourage you to do that, do a little bit of analysis, get down to the root cause, what the sources are, and then look at those tools in the App Exchange and the standard out-of-the-box Salesforce that'll address those issues.
Okay. Interesting Pardot question. You mentioned Pardot a couple of times, and I think you guys are a Pardot consultation partner, or whatever it is. Pardot's unique identifier is an email address, and they've got people with multiple email addresses that relate to the same person. Might be a little bit specific, but have you seen a case where you've got a leader or a contact and they've got 3 different email addresses and they've got 3 different Pardot records, and you've got to have the dupes to see the activities?
Yeah, and that's pretty critical to making sure that you don't want to lose that Pardot data either, right? But once it gets into Salesforce, if you identify the duplication criteria and you can match those, that will help, because if you can identify email, that doesn't work, right? In the case where you have 3 different emails, but name, first name, last name, could be any phone number, something to catch it. It's not going to be 100% accurate, because we see that often too, is that we may get people that submit a form and they do under one email versus another email, or they've changed, right? And that's an opportunity to say, has this person changed positions, right? Or are they doing this under a different email address? So yes, you can identify those with the dedupe and you can isolate those. Then somebody has to probably make a decision to say, hey, if they do have 3 different emails, what's in fact the latest? And do you want to use that as an opportunity to merge those records together and create one record? But that would be a scenario. You're going to have to live a little bit. There are some exceptions to the rule. The rule you want to catch, if you're lucky, 90% of it. It's the other 10% that you have to prepare for, and then manage manually through the system.
It's a difficult one there, because obviously you might get some people that want, they've got their business email account that they want to sign up for certain stuff for, but if they sign up for some sort of newsletter, they might want to go to one of their personal accounts or something like that. We've got someone saying, what's your position on buying in data and data services? Do you work with a lot of people that buy in the data? I mean, I've got my own view on this personally, which is, if you want to buy in SIT codes off of, DMB or something like that, then do it from reputable companies, but try and avoid these emails where they try and sell you all the publicly available, get all the VPs or the IT managers from the Fortune 500, because normally it's not worth the spreadsheet it's written on, if that's the right term.
I come from traditionally a sales background as well, so I remember the days of where we used to buy lists and we'd call people and pre-qualify them and then bring them in. And you're right. I mean, in this day and age, there's a lot of moving people and positions, and they change quite often. And depending on the nature of your business, it's not necessarily always the best idea to just go out and buy a list. And when I say that, you can use the tools that are out there like data.com and the clean function. There is some validation in that updating of that data, But yeah, targeting and getting subsets of data that's been opted in, like data.com, I think is a powerful option. It depends also what business you're in too. If you're looking for just companies, that's one thing. If you're looking for person accounts or people that are a little bit different, sometimes those lists aren't as accurate. I think you have to weigh that out a lot with your internal methodology and how, if you didn't get a list, how would you replace that process, right? How would you go out and identify it? Would it be you work and identify opportunities through social media and do more of a social listening approach? If your business supports that, that would work great. But in some cases, customers can't do that, right? So there's a myriad of conversations that we have with customers about how do you identify your personas and your targets, and how do you engage with them? Because I think today, even more so now than 2 or 3 years ago, there's different creative ways that you can try and find connections. Part of it may be you buy a list. Part of it may be you need to qualify that list and really spend some time on nurturing that list before you engage with them. So a long answer to a very short question, but I think it really depends on your approach to how you develop your personas and how you develop your relationships with your leads to determine whether or not the provider could give you the data sets you need. Is there value in having data cleaned, and is there value in getting lists? Sure. Is it as valuable today as it was before? I don't know. It just depends on your industry and your organization. I hope that answered the question. I know it was
it's a very difficult, it is a difficult question to answer. Very last question, and I think this is probably going to set us up for another webinar on another day at another time. But we've got several people talking about user adoption. You know, the biggest problem with data quality isn't so much the fields in Salesforce, it's not so much the integrations they've got, it's just users using the Salesforce system. How do you drive that user adoption? How do your clients really tackle that issue? As I say, that's probably a webinar in itself.
It's a great question, though. Yeah.
Is there any, you know, sort of golden tips that you could sort of provide as the last thing that we're talking about today?
Yeah, and I'm going to date myself here a little bit, my age, but I've been in the industry now for 20 years in different software companies. And, you know, whether you're rolling out an ERP system or a CRM system, there cannot be any ambiguity around the importance of entering data. And I'll give you an example, and it's one that I think is a telling one. You know, today when we started in ERP automation a long time ago, you know, it had to be done because you had to get your P&Ls out, you had to do your billing, people had to get paid, you had to pay AP, right? And it wasn't an option, right? And I think with CRM, in the functions that CRM, you know, whether it's marketing or sales or service, it's kind of an area that's a little bit gray, where people have kind of, well, do we need you to enter the data or don't we? It's really a hard and fast rule in my mind to say it's essential, right? Because today, more so than any other time, the data around your customer is the most important. So I use a methodology, we use a coaching methodology where we identify the key people that are in Salesforce that have really empowered themselves and are really motivated by using it. And we pair them with somebody that's maybe not as motivated, and that they allow them internally to coach those individuals and kind of work through that process. Because sometimes if an admin or a center of excellence says, hey, you have to do it this way, it doesn't necessarily rub them the right way. But if you allow somebody to coach and mentor that person through that, that has worked really well. And I would say you always have it. But I would say today we have more customers coming into organizations that don't have Salesforce that are demanding they have Salesforce. And they're saying, I can't do my job without it. So I think when you get passionate people that really understand the value of it, they will help these other people adopt it if you give them the opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. It's certainly something that we've done here. You know, really driving that unique value to the user, showing how it's going to help them improve, help them get better. And there's no better person to do that than one of their colleagues sitting right next to them who they can relate to. You know, it's not just a management thing. You know, it affects their day-to-day life and makes them be better at their job. There's a webinar about 2 weeks' time, and it's going to be Daniel Remedios, our product manager, demonstrating the new Ebsta score. how that's going to help people improve their sales conversion rates. We're really excited. We're working with some really fantastic companies, so we hope to be bringing you some case studies on that. But for now, I want to thank you, Matt, for your time today. It's been great having you. If anyone, we're going to send the recording. We're going to send Matt's details, so if anyone wants to contact Matt afterwards, that's great. If anyone found the presentation particularly helpful today, then please feel free to give Matt a shout out on Twitter.
Take care.
But for now, that's it. Thank you, Matt, for your time today, and I'll be speaking to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.